Good morning again, everyone. Well, we are in week 7 of an 8-week series called Choose Wisely, where we are looking at what's called wisdom literature, the book of Proverbs. And this morning we are talking about marriage, the topic of marriage. We're going to first look at wisdom for selecting a spouse, and then second, at wisdom for keeping the covenant of marriage. So if you're looking to get married, or if you are married, God is going to speak to you this morning through His Word. If you're here and you are single and you're not sure if you're going to get married, or you really don't want to get married, there's still this morning principles for relationships in your life. And so God's going to speak to you as well. And then for those of you that are here and you are divorced, maybe there might be just a few triggers this morning as you kind of maybe bring back some memories and there's still some pain. For you this morning, I want to remind you that even though divorce is not good, it is not the end of your life, that God wants to meet you here this morning and speak to you and lead you as you move forward in the future. So we're talking about marriage. If you have your teaching outline, I invite you to take it out at this time, and let's begin this morning with wisdom for selecting a spouse. Begin in Proverbs chapter 12, verse 4. A wife of noble character is her husband's crown, but a disgraceful wife is like decay or cancer in his bones. And Solomon over and over again shares with us that marriage, who you marry, is important. And he warns us against marrying someone with wrong character, the wrong character. If you choose a person that's bad, the consequences can be devastating. Proverbs 27, 15, and 16. A quarrelsome wife is like the dripping of a leaky roof in a rainstorm. Restraining her is like restraining the wind or grasping oil with the hand. Again, a quarrelsome wife. Again, if there's a bad character there, there's a consequence. Now I want to pause for a moment and just ask the question, is Proverbs down on women? Right? Is this sexist? I mean, we have the disgraceful woman, we have the seductive woman, we have the quarrelsome woman, we have the ideal woman who's perfect in every way. What about the men? Isn't there a Proverbs 32, the ideal husband? Okay. Again, context is how we are to interpret the Word of God. And the context is King Solomon is speaking to a number of young men who are enrolled in the school of wisdom. And so he's speaking to them, but what he is saying is applicable to women as well. So we could say a quarrelsome wife, or we could say a quarrelsome husband, or we could say a disgraceful husband. So that's just a little context. So women, this is not sexist. This is simply context. So notice there, Solomon says it's important again who you choose to be your partner, and warns against choosing the wrong partner. But notice what he says next. He says, trying to change a quarrelsome person, right? That there's that constant drip, drip, drip. It's like trying to restrain the wind. Stop the wind. It's like trying to grasp oil in your hand. In other words, it's not going to happen. That you, as you look to marry someone, need to say to yourself, I can't change him, or I can't change her. I can seek to influence him or seek to influence her, but I can't change them. Only God can. And for those of you that aren't married, please hear from all of us that are married that is so true. Is it not? I can't change him. I can't change her. I can influence, but I can't change. 3 red flags that you need to be aware of when it comes to choosing a spouse. Okay, you're looking to find the right person, and things may be going well, but you spot something which you need to stop and and think it through. And here are 3 red flags that you need to do not pass go, do not collect $200. Okay, the first one is abuse. If the person you're dating or the person you're engaged to is abusive and you think, oh, when we get married, he'll change or she'll change, there's a great likelihood they won't. That's a red flag. A second one is control. If they're controlling, oh, he's a little controlling with the money or with the time, or she is, and you think, oh, when we get married, then things will get better. Chances are they won't. And then the third one is contempt, where your person you're dating or you're engaged to kind of looks down on you, talks to you from a position of superiority. Again, that's another red flag. So Solomon is warning us, listen, you want to find the right person and you want to make sure going in that you realize you can't change that person. So here from the book of Proverbs, let's look at 4 steps that I can follow that will help me to make a wise decision in selecting a spouse. Number 1, seek God's favor first. We read in Proverbs 18:22, he who finds a wife, or it could be a husband, finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. Your spouse is a gift from God to you. And you want to seek God's favor first in that you want to, with that gift, say, God, I want your favor. I want to do your will, which is to find someone that also is following God, seeking God. It's one thing to be dating and engaged to someone that likes classical music and you like country, or they like sushi and you like cheeseburgers. But it's a whole different ballgame to be dating or engaged to someone that really doesn't want anything to do with God, and he is the center of your life. So you're praying, God, I want your favor upon me to find that special someone. So seek God's favor first, which shrinks the playing field, but again, the God factor is so big. Number 2, second step, use the right criteria in choosing a spouse. Okay, don't base your decision to get married on the fact that your spouse can give you money, or your spouse might give you status, or today the big one is your spouse is, you're going to be sexually compatible with your spouse. You got that chemistry. Solomon says, no, there's another way, another decision you want to make when it comes to who you're going to marry. Look what he says in Proverbs 31:30. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So charm or personality, that's a good thing. You know, I'm interested in him or I'm interested in her, but that's not the primary basis, because someone can hide their personality from you while you are dating or engaged. Secondly, beauty. It's a good thing to be attracted to that person, but you need to realize that can't be your sole basis for getting married, because wrinkles are going to come and age spots are going to come and your hair is going to fall out or turn gray for the most part. You base your decision, the primary criteria is that this person is taking God seriously. They're fearing the Lord. They're a person of character. The character, and you see them wanting God and wanting to follow God. That's the most important thing. Step number 3, seek the advice of wise people in your life. Proverbs 15:22, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. Over and over again, Solomon connects wise choices and wisdom and success and plans with counsel, with advice, that you're open to hearing from those who know you well. And in many cases, it's your parents. If you have a parent or parents that are not godly and they're not trustworthy, then you're seeking someone else out in your life that they can speak into you. Because what can happen is you can wear rose-colored glasses and you see, kind of like have tunnel vision, and someone can spot and say to you, hey, I just have a little concern. He seems to be a little bit financially irresponsible. Is that right? Like, it just seems like anytime he gets a paycheck, it's just always gone and getting into further and further debt. Is that something? Or it might be they notice that, does she really get along with anybody? Like, really? I always find that there's a lot of disharmony in her relationship. So you're inviting other people to speak into your life, which will help you so you make the wise decision, not a foolish decision. You do what's called due diligence. And then number 4, set your focus on becoming the right person. Yes, you want to find the right person, but you want to become the right person. And Proverbs is all about becoming a wise person, a godly person, a person that fears God. So that as you're waiting for that person, you are saying, God, help me to be gentle. God, help me to be unselfish. God, help me to be honest. God, help me to be humble. And you're working at being, for lack of a better term, good marriage material, right? So you're working and saying, Lord, make me that person. While you're praying, Lord, bring that person into my life. So there's some steps for those of you who are looking to get married. And now let's look then at wisdom for keeping the covenant of marriage. Proverbs 20, verse 3, it is to one's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. Solomon has many proverbs to do with communication, to do with relationships. And he talks here about strife and quarreling. And Solomon in the book of Proverbs, again, he is comparing or contrasting 2 different paths that we can take in life. There's the path of folly and the path of wisdom. And when it comes to communication, he says people that are foolish, they're on the path of folly, they're always quick to quarrel. But the people that are wise, it's to their honor. They avoid strife. They avoid conflict. Now, let me now apply this to marriage and the covenant of marriage. When you enter into a marriage relationship, there is what's called inevitable conflict. And the reason that you will have disagreements with your spouse stems from the fact that you are 2 different people who see the same thing or things in 2 different ways. Different backgrounds, different personalities, different genders. You're different. Okay, everybody that's married, we can all take the next step. We're all different. And who you marry is different from you, which then leads to inevitable conflicts. You have disagreements. But what Solomon is talking here about here is not inevitable conflict. He's talking about avoidable conflict. And he says the fool is the person that just always is escalating conflict, always causing conflict. The wise person, they're dealing with the inevitable conflict and they're seeking to de-escalate it and not to cause more conflict. So with marriage and the covenant of marriage, you're going to have disagreements. And what you need to learn from Proverbs, we need to learn from Proverbs, is that these disagreements are to draw us closer together and not further apart. So we could say this morning. One of the keys in keeping the covenant of marriage is that I learn to communicate well. That I face the differences that I have with my spouse and I'm working through those disagreements. It's so key. It's interesting, King Solomon shared this 3,000 years ago about the importance of communication. And just recently, Karl Pillemer, who is a sociologist and a gerontologist at Cornell University, has just come out with 2 books based on his studies and his findings, where he's spoken with numerous people that are older and asking them about life. And the question posed to them, which was really the impetus for one of his books, was, in your marriage, those that had long marriages, in your long marriage, what was the key to keeping your marriage a lasting marriage? And he said it came in different language, but it was overwhelming, and it was all to do with communication, learning to communicate well. That in marriage, because we're different, we see maybe money a little different. And we need to make sure that we're staying out of debt, but we need to have that money conversation, which means we need to talk to each other about money. And then another stressor in marriage is sex, that we're wired differently, that we see sex differently, and it's not just physical, it's emotional and spiritual. So we need to have the conversation or conversations about sex. We need to communicate. Another one is children. If you have children and you're married, that's a stressor. And you need to put your relationship first so that you give a good foundation for your children. But with that, you need to communicate. What does that look like? And then a fourth stressor in marriage are in-laws. I'm not speaking from personal experience, just that's what the studies say, okay. Right? I want to love your in-laws and you want to love my in-laws and get along, but my first loyalty is to you. And so we need to communicate. What does that look like? How do we deal with that? And then a fifth stressor is work, right? Bringing home stress and spilling it out on those that we love is not a good thing. So how do we make our home a safe haven? So it all is centered around communication. Someone has said that we ought to put communication explicitly in our marriage vows. It's very interesting that we just spell it out. Do you, before God and these witnesses, John, take Janice to be your wife? Will you love her and cherish her and talk to her? And talk to her some more. And keep talking. In sickness and in health, in poverty and wealth, and forsaking all others, be faithful to her as long as you both shall live. That when you get married, there's going to be disagreements, inevitable conflict, but you are saying, I'm going to talk to you all through our lifetimes. Communication. Now, some couples talk a lot and some talk less. If you're chatty and your spouse is chatty, lots of talk. If you're chatty and your spouse is more reserved or an introvert, you got to communicate and see what that looks like. If you're both reserved, you're going to talk less, but you're still communicating. And if you're here this morning, I want to remind you that if you're here this morning, you're married, remind you of the importance of communication, that God wants that for you to communicate well. So if you're here and you say, you know what, I just don't talk much. Don't want to talk to my wife that much or my husband that much. That's not good. You need to talk. Or if you're here this morning and say, I really struggle, I'm awkward with personal issues, well, you've got to push through that and you need to talk. If you're here this morning and you're busy, or your spouse is busy, and you say, we just don't have time for each other. No, you need to talk. Learn to communicate well. So let's look at a number of other proverbs to do with communication and how it applies to the marriage relationship. Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So on the path to folly, there's the spouse that is just harsh. On the path of wisdom is the spouse that is learning to be gentle, sensitive, showing empathy. Proverbs 15:18, a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. The spouse on the path to folly has temper tantrums. The spouse on the path of wisdom is learning to be patient. Proverbs 10:19, sin is not ended by multiplying words, but the prudent hold their tongues. The spouse on the path of folly just talks impulsively, just sharing whatever they think. Got to have the first word, last word, and every word in between. The spouse on the path to wisdom is restraining their speech. 15:2, the tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. Folly, knowledge. Proverbs 12:15, the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. The spouse on the path of folly, you can't say anything to them. They don't need any advice. The wise spouse is always open and teachable and humble. Proverbs 18:2, fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. Parents, we want to teach our children to seek first to understand, then to be understood. That's wisdom, right? You want to learn to listen and then respond. But the fool has nothing to do with that. They don't listen to anybody. They delight in just hearing the sound of their own voice. And then Proverbs 18:6, the lips of fools bring them strife, and their mouths invite a beating. The lips of fools. The fool is the person that speaks too quickly, speaks too much, speaks too carelessly, and speaks too bluntly. And if you're here this morning and you love the sound of your own voice and you speak before you listen or you speak more than you listen, there's a good chance you are a fool. So you need to get off of that path and on the path of wisdom. A few verses to do with the wise person. Proverbs 19:11, a person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. Now, again, there are some offenses that are big that we have to deal with, but most of them in our relationships and in our marriage are smaller offenses that we need to overlook. Just let them go. Yes, you've spoken to your spouse about something, and you've tried to work it through, but you're letting it go. You're realizing that you're not perfect, and they're not perfect, and you have bad days, and they have bad days, and you have slip-ups, and they have slip-ups. The wise person is patient, overlooking offenses. Proverbs 17:27, the one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. The wise spouse is the person that, again, is very careful with their words because they know that words have power, and they don't want to speak words of death. They want to speak words of life. And the wise spouse is the person that is even-tempered, that is learning to identify their feelings and to control them. Proverbs 25, verse 5, the purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. The wise spouse is learning to be wise and is able to go beneath the surface with their spouse and draw out their spouse's heart, their thoughts, their feelings. So listening and probing and asking. So a number of proverbs to do with communication that we can apply to marriage. Well, I'd like to next share 5 ideas for improving communication and reducing conflict. Okay, so God wants us to break out of any patterns that have to do with the path of folly, and he wants us to learn patterns that are on the path of wisdom. Again, with that inevitable conflict, there needs to be communication where we're learning to communicate well. Number 1, make time for each other. This is especially true of the what's referred to those that are in the middle-age blur. You're between 30 and 50, and you probably have some kids, maybe a child or two running around, and you know your careers and work. And what can happen is that you're so busy that you don't have time for each other. And study after study shows the importance of making us time, where you're not just relating as a father or a mother, but you're relating as husband and wife together. And interesting, one study just came out showing couples that have been married more than a decade that are in happy, fulfilling marriages. And one of the things they found was that the couples had what's called me time or self-care time, that they didn't smother each other. There was a place for it to go out to, for one of the partners to go out and participate in a hobby or some interest, and then they come back together. But the importance of us time, making time for each other. So those of you that are married, what does that look like in your life? Is it once a day, 10 minutes you're talking to each other, or every few days? Do you ever, or you need to, if you don't do this, you need to have like a date night if you have kids, again, where you have that us time. And I want to say to you, those of you that are thinking of buying a house or buying a car, don't put yourself in a financial position where you buy the big house and you have no money to pay a babysitter, right? Buy a smaller house and pay the babysitter and invest in us time. If you're looking to get married, don't have that big wedding that's going to put you into debt. Actually, Emory University just came out with a finding that couples that reached a certain cost figure when it came to their marriage and they went over it were much more likely to divorce than those that had a less glamorous wedding, right? Because they weren't in financial a bond. So make sure you have time to go out with each other if it means hiring a babysitter. One just other note too is John and Julie Gottman, who are the founders of the Gottman Institute, which this couple for over 4 decades has been studying what leads to marital stability. to long marriages, and they're quite esteemed. But one of the things they found in their studies is that couples that kept the mm-hms to a minimum had longer marriages. Okay, does everybody know what I'm talking about, the mm-hmm, right, if you're a couple? So you're looking at a screen or the paper or something, and your spouse says something to you, and you go, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Couples where after the one, made a motion to connect or, for attention, the couples where the one would lift their eyes and actually speak to the other person, indicating you have my attention, that they had longer marriages. So just be mindful of that. We're not perfect. I think in marriage we do need some mm-hms. That's my personal thing, but not too many. That's what my wife says anyway. Okay. Number 2, call a time out. So you want to make sure you have time to communicate with each other on a regular basis, but there are times when you run into disagreements where you can't come up with a solution right away, and that's a place for you to call a time out where you give the signal or something. Can we talk about this in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, or can we talk about this maybe tomorrow? Again, you're not withdrawing, you're not going to bed angry, but what you're saying is I'm turned towards you, you're turned towards me, and we can't figure this out, and we can't agree on this, and there's still things up in the air, but we're not going to talk about it right now and try to come up with a solution. And the reason is because there's something called physiological flooding, where in the heat of the moment something comes up and we want to talk about it, and we're in the fight or flight response system where our prefrontal cortex has shut down in a sense, and we can't be rational or logical. We're so emotionally engaged, and so it's just loud. That's not good. So call a time out. Number 3, the third idea is choose the right time and the right structure to talk. So the right time is outside of the heat of the moment. The right time is also when you're not tired or hungry, right? Trying to work through a disagreement that might be intense. If you're tired, it's probably not the best time, or you're hungry. I've used this one so many times in my marriage. Honey, my blood sugar is really low. Can we talk about this after, right? Which is valid, right? So you want to choose the right time and the right structure. You want to have ground rules. So when you do come together to talk about whatever needs to be worked through, is that you have things in place. So for example, how long are you going to talk? Every time you talk, is it going to be 10 minutes? Is it going to be half an hour? Who has the floor first? And when the person has the floor, how's the other person listening? You talk through in a way where you both are showing respect to the other person. There's ground rules. Interesting, from the Gottman Institute, John Gottman identifies the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In other words, if you see these in your marriage, there's a problem, and you do not want to have these when you talk to each other about an issue. The first one, again, is contempt. That's a big one. So if you come together to talk about something and one of you looks down on the other person, kind of almost sneering in disgust or rolling your eyes, that is foolish. That is not good. You need to stop that. A second one is criticism. If you're a spouse who's always blaming it on your spouse, that you're on the path to folly. That's not good. A third one is defensiveness. If you're always assuming the posture of a victim, that's not good as well. And then the fourth one is stonewalling. If you are just walking out or you shut down, that's not good. So we need to talk about the ground rules. And by the way, this is not real easy. And that's why we need the help of God with that. Number 4, clarify what you are thinking, feeling, and want to do. So in other words, don't be a mind reader, or don't assume your spouse is a mind reader, right? How come she doesn't know how I feel? Or how come he's not meeting that need? Doesn't he get it? And we need to speak it to our spouse and to clarify. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's how I'm feeling in a safe environment. For me, I've had, over the 25 years of our marriage, kind of 3 light bulb moments when it came to this idea of us being different. for the first couple of years of our marriage, we had some disagreements, which kind of caught us both off guard. We didn't, when we were engaged, I think I mentioned this before, it's just like, there was no disagreements. It was wonderful. Got married the first 2 years, and we read the book, The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. And if you haven't read it, it's an easy read. It's still, after 25 years or so, just a bestseller. You'll see it in a bookstore, or you can get it online. But he talks about how you have different love languages. And so after reading that book, I was like, she's different than me. I'm different from her. Second light bulb moment was I read the book, His Needs, Her Needs by Willard Harley, a Christian psychologist, and he listed the 5 top needs of a typical man and the 5 top needs of a typical woman, and all 5 of them are different. And I was like, hey, she has those and I have those. We're different. And then the third light bulb moment was this past summer. On my summer vacation, I read 2 books of my wife's. I don't know if she passed them along to me or I saw them, I don't know. By Suzanne Stabile, to do with the Enneagram, the Road Back to You and The Path Between Us. I think those were the 2 titles. And after looking at the 9 personality types, and she's this number, and I'm this number, and you're different than me. And what has helped me, and if you're not going to read those books, please understand this point. What has helped me is that when I understand my spouse is different, I don't take things personally. And she doesn't take things personally. That we're wired differently. So we're not out to get each other. It's just that she thinks this way and I sometimes think this way. And she feels that way, I sometimes feel that way. And so to communicate well means we're going back and forth in a safe environment. You think that, I think this, you feel that, I feel this. What's the solution? What's the solution? And by the way, just one thing I've learned over the years of marriage, just for those of you that are newly married, right? Especially if you're a guy, I don't mean to be sexist, but studies bear this out, is that sometimes it's not always fixing it. It's just listening and just communicating. Okay, 5th idea for communicating well in marriage. Mind your manners. Once in a while, our staff, we get together for lunch, and Jeremy Malloy, who's our executive director here at Woodside, offered to do the lunch this one particular time. And so he looked after the food and the drinks, and I showed up at lunch and looked at the food, but there was no Coke. And as I've gotten older, I learned to drink more and more water and not too many soft drinks. But this food, which I knew that we were going to have for lunch, it goes with Coke. And I like Coke, and another staff member, we like Coke. So I showed up at the lunchroom, or where we were having lunch, and I said to Jeremy, I said, you are so selfish. There's no Coke here. Like, why is it always about you and what you want? Don't you know that this food requires Coke? And he responded to me, and he said, you are so ungrateful. Like, I did all of this, and this is how you thank me? Like, come on, get a life. Actually, that's not how we responded. I was very polite and said, oh, Jeremy, there's no Coke here. And I whined a little bit, but there's no Coke. And made my wish known. And then he responded with something like, you know what, life goes on, buddy, you're going to be okay. Kind of, back and forth. When it comes to people in the church, when it comes sometimes to the workplace, we mind our manners, but sometimes in our marriage relationship, we can kind of let that go and just like, well, where's the Coke? What's wrong? Right? And so we need to mind our manners. And by the way, I was sharing the first service. My birthday was just a week or so ago, and Jeremy got me a case of Coke for my birthday, so it's good. So we're all good. Couple wisdom opportunities this morning. First one is, I want to remind you that we have a care ministry here at Woodside. None of us have perfect marriages. We're all still on the journey, and if you need help, please take the step to contact us, and whether it's another couple coming alongside of you or someone coming alongside of you here in the church, or that we refer you to counseling, there is hope for your marriage. And one of the findings from Carl Pillimer from Cornell University was that a lot of these couples, a surprising number of them that had long marriages, were so close to calling it quits. And their advice to younger people was take that step. Don't suffer in silence. Take a step. There is hope. A second opportunity, I just wanted to mention the women's retreat. And the reason I mentioned that is because I found out that they are on this retreat coming up in a couple months, going to be going through the Enneagram and the 9 different personality types. And so all of you ladies there that are married, you can learn that you're this number and your spouse is this number, and you can go home and talk, and your spouse can listen, and then he can talk, and you can listen. And again, if you're single and you go on that women's retreat, it will help you in your relationships as well. A few times a week, 2 or 3 times a week, I swim at the rec center here in town, and one of the guys I swim with that's always there is kind of like the know-it-all guy. He just always lots of knowledge. And so we were just getting ready to go after our swim, and we're at the counter, and the paper towel dispenser is just right near us. And he says to me, oh, have you watched the TED video on how to use paper towels? And I said, no, I haven't. And there's a 3 or 4 minute video that you can Google and find, and this guy explains how to use paper towels properly and reduce paper, right? And he explains that it's a 2-step process. Shake and fold, shake and fold. So to use a paper towel properly, you are supposed to shake your hands 12 times, get all the water off 12 times, then take 1 paper towel from the dispenser and fold it, and then you pat, and if you want to really know, you go online and find it, but you pat your hands. And it really struck me weeks after he told me about this, how to do it, that there's a difference between knowing something and doing something, right? Do you know how many times I've used 1 paper towel since that time? Okay, I'm a follower of Christ, creation care, take care of the environment, but for me, it's kind of a gray area. I use 2. I've always used 2. I'm going to keep using 2. If sometimes by mistake I take 3, I kind of like confess it to the Lord, but I stick to 2, right? It's the same thing. It's one thing to know something, but you need to apply it. And maybe this morning, you know that you need to mind your manners, and you haven't been doing that in your marriage relationship. It's one thing to know that, and then another to actually start practicing that. It's one thing to know that you should get advice from someone those that love you, before you marry someone. It's another thing to actually go and do it. And what is it that gets us from knowing it to actually doing it? As a follower of Christ, it's Jesus. In my marriage, he's what helps me get from here to there, so that I continue to work at having a good marriage. Have I arrived? No, I haven't. But when I bring to mind that Jesus, whom I'm in a relationship with, when I went my own way and I turned from him, he didn't turn from me. That he came after me and sought me out. And his death on the cross is about resolving conflict. That I and him, that we are no longer in conflict. And that as I journey through life with him, he never turns his back. Countless offenses that I've done against him, and he still is turned towards me. And then he says to me as a spouse, you know how I've loved you? You love your spouse that way, which means I don't turn my back from my spouse. That I keep I'm facing her and she's facing me. And so if you're here this morning, you're a follower of Christ, you need to get Jesus into that relationship, into your marriage relationship, so that you take that step and you do what's right, the next step. And if you're married to someone that's got their back towards you and they're not willing, you just say, God, help me to continue to do my part and to love him or to her. So I'm going to ask you this morning, what is it that you know to do and God's calling you to actually do it? Would you join with me as we pray this morning?